Sure. Thanks, gentleman. Gentleman yields back chair now, recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Representative Houchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming to testify before us today. I'm glad we're considering H.R. 4664, the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Act of 2024. Chairman Womack, I want to start by commending you and your team for producing a strong bill, and Ranking Member Hoyer, it's great to see you. Thank you for your contributions and your team for joining us. While I note that you guys don't exactly agree on the final product here, I do appreciate your time and the time of your staff. Chairman Womack, turning back to the work product, I understand that you're particularly proud of two aspects of the bill that I want to touch on. One, ensuring that federal employees return to work and resume their pre-pandemic telework levels, and two, that they focus on their core mission as opposed to overly burdensome and aggressive regulatory agendas. We all know that the Biden administration has overstepped by expanding the regulatory state. For example, as a member of the Financial Services Committee, we've seen the new and burdensome SEC regulations stifle investment and slow down our economy again and again. In particular, there's some positive policy riders that are part of this bill that include rolling back ESG, Green New Deal, and climate regulations that have no place in financial services. We all saw the ramifications with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank when that occurred, in part when federal regulators were so focused on climate risk, they were asleep at the wheel with regard to systemic risk. Other policy riders in the bill include preventing the Federal Housing Finance Agency from forcing responsible borrowers to subsidize those with bad credit, and keeping the Federal Insurance Agency from taking over the insurance industry that should rightfully be left to the states to regulate. So Chairman Womack, can you share with the committee in a little bit more detail why these areas were of particular focus for you and your team, and what the bill does for our constituents?
Well, it's, the general answer is to help make the bureaucracies that make up the federal government accountable for what they do. Because we spend, even though it's 30-ish% of the total federal budget, we spend a lot of money to finance the agencies that are here to work for the American people. So it's more about accountability. But you mentioned, just let's take as an example, the whole telework issue, and the fact that we've got all these federal buildings out here that we're paying for, and that we do not have what I believe is a reasonable and rational in a post-COVID, I'll save COVID for another day, but in the post-COVID environment, we do not have what I believe is a reasonable policy, agency by agency, about their return to work policies. Nor do I believe that we have any identifiable rational metrics that we can use to gauge the productivity of the members of the bureaucracies that are working from home. And the President of the United States and the agencies that make up the federal government, I think, owe the American public more data and more understanding as to what this return to work policy is going to look like. And if they're going to continue to institute telework, then what are the metrics you're using to gauge productivity, and what confidence can the American public have in those metrics to understand that it is a rational way. And as I said earlier in my testimony, I think before you were here today, you can't have it both ways. If you're GSA, you can't continue to operate all these buildings and then leave them empty because you've got very liberal work from home policies. And so the private sector is probably going to be the really good benchmark by which we can use to understand just what is, in fact, a reasonable telework policy if one is going to be necessary in the post-COVID environment.
Thank you. This certainly is part of, I would say, our commitment to America in having a government that's accountable.
Accountable.
And so I appreciate that very much in your crafting of this legislation. I know that you also share my desire to reduce federal spending. The bill reduces spending at the top line. To be more exact, it's approximately 20% below the president's request and a 7% cut below last year's fiscal level. And in this bill, we zero out unauthorized federal programs, which is something that I wish we would see more of in other appropriations bills. Would it be fair for me to argue that you've achieved these savings while also making critical investments in other areas? In particular, I note the Treasury, cybersecurity, federal judiciary, and federal payments to support DC courts to address backlog. Those have all received additional investments. Why was it important to you to invest in these activities in this legislation?
Well, you know, the fact that this particular bill does a really deep dive on the agencies under our jurisdiction, and let me just say, we span quite a wide swath of agencies. We go all the way from the Treasury to the Executive Office of the White House and a lot of things in between. But you mentioned a minute ago, we have zeroed out or reduced funding 31 unauthorized accounts. That saves a significant amount of money. We hold a lot of agencies below the FY22 level. And as I said earlier, remember the FY22 budget is what we were operating on less than a year ago. So this whole notion that what we're doing right now is going to cause the sky to fall, well, it wasn't falling 10 months ago, and it's not going to fall now. But what the bill does is it tries to take a reasonable approach to how can we hold agencies accountable, how can we reduce spending, how can we capture the attention of these agencies that money is an object, that productivity is in fact important, and then not just continue to fund something because we've always funded it. And then I think eventually we're going to have to put the pressure back on the authorizing agencies, authorizing committees, to do their job to make sure that what we are funding are in fact authorized programs of the United States. So, I mean, these are all things that we've tried to accomplish in our bill. It's not perfect, and you know, if Steny and I were just a committee of two, it'd look probably different than it is right now. But at the end of the day, we have to get a bill passed through the House. We got to be able to go to conference in the Senate, make our best case for what we're trying to do with our priorities, and then come up with a conference report that both chambers can live with.
Thank you, Chairman Womack. I want to just say that if we want to change the way Washington works, we have to change the way that we work in Washington, and this is a great first step. Do we have more work to do in terms of our debt? We absolutely do. This discretionary spending that we are talking about is not scratching the surface of the mandatory spending that we have yet to deal with, but I do appreciate your efforts on this front to try to reduce spending on the discretionary side, and I look forward to moving this bill on the floor this week. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady.